Thank you for joining us today at Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris, and I'll be your host on this journey as we discuss birds, wildlife, parks, nature, and the environment. At least once a week, I'll bring you the very best of America's spectacular world of nature, from birds to mammals to reptiles and amphibians, from soaring mountains to endless plains, from rugged coastlines to rivers and streams. Every episode will feature an expert guest, a ranger, a researcher, a birder, an author, a biologist, or an adventurer, someone who has seen what we want to see and been where we want to go. This isn't just another nature show. It's a safari for your eyes and ears. Now let's get started on today's adventure. And as always, stay curious. Hi, this is Scott Harris, and we're here today on Naturally Scott. I've got a fascinating guest today, a little bit different from any of the other people that we've had on board, and it might be a little bit different from any of the people we're going to have on board. So we'll see how that goes. Kean, hey, help me out with the pronunciation of your last name.
Almryde, Kean Almryde.
Almryde. Okay. All right. Fantastic. I just want to make sure I got that wrong because I got Kean wrong. It wasn't until I was listening to your Instagram things that I found out it was Kean. So we'll focus. I'll make sure I try to get that right. And we'll be talking about those. So Kean's a new birder. A relatively new birder. We actually became birders about the same time. We fall into those. I'm not a huge fan of names like this, but we're both what they call COVID birders.
Yeah.
Mine was accidental. I think Kean's was just a little more on purpose with the hummingbirds and stuff. But why don't you go ahead and tell us that story about how you got involved in birding? And by the way, I've shared this with you guys before, but Kean is one of the guests in my book, Why We Love Birds, 52 Birds on Birders. So you can watch them on the podcast today. When that book comes out, you can learn a little bit more about them. I'm not going to cover everything we covered in the book. Then why do you buy the book? Plus, he's done a lot of things since, so we'll go over those. But why don't you talk a little bit, if memory serves, we've got hummingbirds, peregrine falcons, and burrowing owls.
That is correct. Yeah. So during COVID, I was working from home down in San Diego County, northern part, Encinitas. And one of the things I would do is I sat in front of a window, and in front of the window was a hummingbird feeder. So I would literally spend hours every day just watching the hummingbirds come in and fly out. And, at some point I had given them all names. There was Tangerine and there was Peridot. And I thought, this was a little fun activity.
You could recognize the differences?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Yeah.
Do you know now what they were?
They were definitely Allen's hummingbirds and Anna's hummingbirds for the most part. Yeah. But
so you could differentiate between the two species. Could you differentiate between individuals within the species?
No, at the time I probably assumed all the green ones were the same and all the orange ones were the same.
Okay. All right. And previous to that, had you had any interest in birding other than, hey, that's a pretty bird or a cute song? Or
not really. No.
How about other animals? Were you a mammal guy or a herp guy? Or
I can't say that I was. No, not really.
Okay.
I think I enjoyed being out in nature, and I think it would be cool if you saw a deer or something on occasion. But no, nothing.
All right.
As deliberate as this. But
so COVID, a home office, and a 1/4 ounce bird.
That's right.
Kind of changed a little bit the direction of your life.
I mean, truly, it truly did. And it's so funny you say that, because that's one of the things that, had you told me back then that it would have changed my life so dramatically, I would have been like, really? Like birding or being into birds? But it's so true. It just kind of takes over your life in many good ways. That's for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, as you mentioned, I had spoken to, my neighbors and family about the hummingbirds. And then the next thing I know is our neighbor, I learned, is it counts birds for the city. That was pretty exciting. So I was getting to talk to him, and he's like, "Oh, did you see the burrowing owl that's over by the train tracks?" And I'm like, "Wait, what burrowing owl? I didn't even know owls lived in the ground, let alone there's one called a burrowing owl."
You know what? I didn't either when I started birding. I didn't know there were burrowing owls.
No.
As a matter of fact, I would have lost a substantial part of the 87 cents I've accumulated in my lifetime on a bet there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I figured they're all in, pine trees and barns for the most part. But yeah, went over and saw the burrowing owl, and I'm like, this is kind of cool. It's like a treasure hunt almost, finding some of these rare bird appearances. And then kind of around the same time, I would go running on the beach, at least once a week. And there was an old surf light that was sticking out from the side of the cliff, the bluff side, and I would always see a peregrine falcon just perched up there. And so it's kind of like these three things were all happening over the same summer, and I was pretty much hooked from that moment on.
Did you know the peregrine falcon was a peregrine falcon?
I knew that it was different than a hawk, because I was used to seeing lots of, red-tailed, red-shouldered hawks, and as a kid we saw those frequently enough that we could determine the difference between the two of them. I mean, the red tail is a pretty dead giveaway, but I knew from the facial markings that this was not a hawk and it was definitely something different. I think upon investigation and chatting, and they were like, "Oh no, that's the peregrine falcon that lives in the neighborhood."
Okay. And was this the first summer of COVID? Was this 2020?
I think this was 2021. I want to say it was 2021. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. And so you surprised yourself and got into birding, which I understand now, if I remember right, birding joins two other passions of yours, which is travel and entertainment.
That's right. Yes.
And you have figured out ways to tie all three of those together.
Yeah, for the most part. I think I'm probably a little bit unique from some of your other guests that you've had on. And
very much so.
I work in the entertainment industry, and so everything that I do really revolves around storytelling and that sort of thing. What really has kind of piqued my interest over the last couple of years, especially as I got more and more into birding, is kind of finding that intersection of entertainment and storytelling with birds. So yeah, like I'll see a bird in a piece of media, or I'll see a bird in a piece of artwork, or there's a story about them, and then that leads me to kind of do a little bit of investigation on what's going on there, what's the story that's happening. The best example, and kind of really how things took off for me, was when the live action Little Mermaid film came out a couple of years ago. I noticed that the character of Scuttle, which is typically in the cartoon version a seagull, had been changed to a different bird, which is now a northern gannet. And I thought to myself, that's an interesting choice. I wonder why that was. And so I kind of postulated that, looking up northern gannets, where they live, and kind of some of their habits is collecting odd bits and bobs and artifacts.
Okay, we lost you there for a second.
Gotcha.
Okay, you're back.
Anyways, so I did research on the northern gannet, learned that it had, various tendency of collecting different odds and ends from, and puts it in their nest. I thought, well, that's interesting. That fits very well for that particular character. And then upon more investigation, I learned that the director deliberately changed the bird to be a northern gannet so that it could dive under the water and be where Ariel is. And it was just, I thought that was so interesting. And so I made a TikTok about that topic. And then that TikTok went viral. That went up like 500,000 views later. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I guess I'm not the only one that was as interested in this new tidbit as I thought. And so that really, was kind of the official hook of, okay, there's something here with the connection between, birding and entertainment and kind of the stories that we tell, using our avian friends.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Now let's back up just a little bit, because most of our listeners won't know. Kean is a marketing executive at Disney. And in the chapter that I wrote, I called him the entertainment birder.
Yes.
We avoided any legal issues by not calling him the Disney birder. And so we're going with the entertainment birder, which I think is kind of cool. So in our conversations previously, and I know now you've expanded beyond just talking about Disney birds, but you did have some other Disney movie bird stories that you had done. And I think you came up with a name. It's not a name I had heard of before. Forensic birding?
Forensic birding, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so define for the audience what forensic birding is.
Yeah, it's really just, seeing a bird in a piece of media and then trying to kind of piece together what's that story that they're trying to tell with that particular bird, or kind of, peeling back the layers and figuring out what's going on there, beyond kind of on the surface level. Some of the examples, I think I gave this example in the book, but at Disney's California Adventure, at their Grand Californian Hotel, along the elevator bank, there are these, it's called a grotesque sculpture, and it's of different birds. And so I was like, well, that's interesting, because every level there's, a different pair. And so upon further investigation and doing that forensic investigation, learned that the birds are, for the most part, where they are situated on the floors kind of correlates to where you would find them in the natural world in terms of elevation. So some of the shorebirds are on the ground floor, as opposed to some of the birds that are on the higher floors are the ones that soar pretty high in the air, like, an eagle or a hawk. And so I thought that was, really interesting in kind of.
And this is a giant mural inside California's Grand Californian Hotel, right?
Sculptures near the
Okay.
elevator bank. Yep.
Okay.
And there's
And
two per level.
this is a Disney hotel.
This is a Disney hotel in Southern
And
California.
how many floors are we talking about?
I believe it's, 6 floors.
And each floor has different statues.
Each floor has 2 different statues. Yep.
Okay. And they do a pretty good job of corresponding to where they might be in the canopy of ground to sky.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember at the top of my head, and all of the birds that they had selected too are for the most part California native species. There were a few in there that I was like, I would have chose something different. I wish I could remember what those examples were, but yeah, it was interesting figuring out why they made those choices or why those certain choices were made. Obviously it's a California themed hotel, so that made sense. And so it was just interesting that because of my interest in birds, that it led me down this path of really discovering more information about this artwork. And so it goes beyond just, seeing birds in the wild, but again, like seeing birds in media.
Do you get to count those on your eBird list, the statues?
I don't. No.
So do you know if the other Disney places have a similar thing? Orlando or Paris or Tokyo or?
No, this was pretty unique to the Grand California Hotel. However, I was sailing on one of their Disney cruise ships on a project. And just to backtrack a little, I had recently, earlier in the year, had gone to Brazil, on vacation. And one of my kind of nemesis birds has always been the Toco toucan. And so that was, I was just really hyped about Toco toucans. Anyways, going back to the sailing that I was on, I noticed there was a piece of artwork in one of the stairwells, and it was a beautiful looking rainforest with some ocean in the background, and then on the ocean were the 7 different Disney ships that are part of the current fleet, and then flying above the rainforest were Toco toucans. And I'm like, I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. And I looked at kind of the geographic map of where you would find Toco toucans in the world, and a rainforest and a body of water, and deduced that photo, or that it was the painting has to be in Brazil, because if you use the location of where these birds naturally live, as well as the water and the rainforest, like, you can only pinpoint it to that one place in the world. And so again, that investigation, going back, trying to figure out what's the story here. And that was just really exciting to see this beautiful piece of artwork, and, kind of knowing something that I would assume no one else knew, that this was a photo that is in.
Well, you have to finish the story. Did you find the bird in Brazil? Because I think you found a couple of things while you were in Brazil.
Exactly. Yeah. While I went to Iguazu Falls as part of the tour, and the entire time I was, walking through the falls, I was sure that I would see a toucan there. No luck. So then the last day we were in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was me and my partner. Last day in Sao Paulo,
you met in Brazil, is that right?
I met him in Australia, actually, in Melbourne. Oh, Sydney, excuse me.
That's right. He lived in Brazil, but you met him in Australia.
He's from Brazil originally, yes, but I met him in Australia. But yeah, he was with me, and we were in his hometown in Sao Paulo at a park. And again, my eBird's out. I'm kind of seeing like what's some of the, common birds that I might see at this park. And it wasn't like the most grandest park I've ever seen, if I can be honest. And as we were like leaving the park, I was following a woodpecker up a tree. And as I'm following the woodpecker with my eyes up a tree, I look up, and at the top of that tree is a pair of Toco toucans. And my jaw almost hit the ground, because it was listed as a very rare bird for that area. And so I'm trying to be as quiet as possible while trying to signal to my partner, like, oh my gosh, come look at this. You'll never believe what I found on our last day on vacation, this nemesis bird of mine. And that was a really exciting kind of experience and story for sure.
Well, that's great. Now, you also have a laughing kookaburra?
Kookaburra, yep.
Kookaburra, you have a kind of a neat birding and romantic story about that, if you want to share that, because I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that one connects back to my partner Carlos. When I met him in Australia a couple of years ago. And we stayed in touch and then started dating. And so then we had made a plan because he was still living in Australia at the time. I was living in the United States. So we had planned for him to come visit the US in June of that year to kind of the first time ever he would be visiting Los Angeles in the United States. And so when he visited, I have one of those page-a-day calendars, and it's all different birds, all the different birds. And one of the birds I had seen in Australia that's native to Australia is the laughing kookaburra. And so I always thought, like, that's, a fun little connection. That's a nice bird to have on your list. And then the day that he flew to Los Angeles to come visit me, the page-a-day calendar had a laughing kookaburra as the bird of the day, which I thought was just a really wonderful coincidence. So now kookaburras and toucans are kind of like the two birds that really represent our relationship.
Now, should you guys get married down the road, will those be the two things on top of the cake?
If
a laughing kookaburra and a toucan?
Might take some convincing, but yes, I would certainly venture to guess yes.
At least a couple cupcakes on the side, right?
Yes,
I mean, if you don't win the major cake war, you could get a compromise.
Totally, yes.
So let's back up because there were a couple questions I wanted to ask, but I didn't want to interrupt, which is unusual for me. You use the term grotesque bird sculptures.
Yes.
And I did not ask you that while I was interviewing you for the book, which was a mistake of mine. What the heck is a grotesque bird sculpture? It sounds like it's a category of sculptures, not a description like an ugly bird sculpture. So what does that mean?
I want to say it was the late 19th century, early 19th century, but it was a style of sculpture that was typically in the shape of birds. And they were purposely made to look ugly so that if you had them in your house, they were hollow, you could put valuables inside of them. And because they were purposefully ugly, if you ever had burglars coming into your house, that they would not want to steal the sculpture because it was, as it said, grotesque. They're pretty ugly looking. So it was just like, I don't know why they decided to put grotesque birds, but yeah, that's kind of the history behind those types of sculptures.
So the next time I'm at the hotel, should I check inside these sculptures and see if there's some Disney riches in there, some lifetime passes, or a couple of the old e-tickets, anything?
Wouldn't that be nice? I've tried seeing if the heads came off. Unfortunately, they are sealed shut. But I mean, they're still there. You can see them in the stairwell. Yeah, they're certainly live up to their name.
All right. And also on going back again, sorry about this, but bringing you back to the Little Mermaid. Did you ever talk to the director or find out why he or she, I don't remember who directed the movies, but why he or she switched the birds? Were they contacted by birders? Were they birders themselves?
Oh, I didn't get a chance to talk to him. I did see, I think, articles that he did, because it was a question that other people asked, because people that are familiar with the Little Mermaid animated film know that Scuttle has always been a seagull. And so it was a natural question that popped up. And he said on the record that he wanted a bird that can go underwater so it could speak to Ariel. I was like, all right, well, it's, a good enough reason for me.
I guess you take the willing suspension of disbelief only so far.
Yeah. And then the bird's talking underwater, but
the inconsistent part of the movie in reality was having a talking gull.
Yes.
The rest of it we all bought into.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Tell me about other Disney birds. I know there's some other stuff we're going to talk about, Coyote versus Acme and LA parrots and a 17-foot tall pigeon. Feather fever. There's a bunch of stuff that, and at the end, Kean, don't let us end this without you telling people where they can find you.
Sure.
And hear some of these stories on Instagram because they're great. I love them when they come out. So I want you to share some of it with the audience today.
Absolutely.
But before we go, because you're kind of an expert on Disney and Disney birds, any other movies, any other Disney bird stories that you have that you want to share with us?
The only one that I'll bring up, and this has kind of become almost a personal mascot for me, is my favorite Disney, or my new favorite Disney character is José Carioca, who is a green parrot, and he was in 2 films, Three Caballeros and Saludos Amigos. This was back when Walt Disney did his South American tour, but there was 2 films that José Carioca pops up, and it's this green Brazilian bird that was in these films. I would say lesser known character in many ways, but has now become my favorite just because he's Brazilian, he's a green parrot, and so and it's a Disney character.
That's kind of cool. And I mean, with Disney, you guys can't make a change in anything without being notified by thousands of fans, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, people will catch on to any and everything.
Anything at all. I know even like when I write my Westerns, I've got a couple series of Western novels that I write. And boy, I'll tell you what, if I misplace a town or a gun by a year, I say this Winchester
Yeah.
came out in 878 and was actually 1879, and you get letters and emails and, what kind of writer are you and who do you think you are? And it's like, whoa, oh, hold on. It is a fiction, piece of fiction, but you do want to get those things correct if you can, like a northern gannet over a gull.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
so I get that. Now you mentioned your favorite bird from the old Disney movies, but you've also done a piece on parrots in LA,
Hmm.
which is a really cool story. So for those that are into birding, there are a number now of parrots and parakeets in different pockets of the US, Southern California and parts of Florida being the top two. And there are a variety of legends and myths and stories and conjectures as to how they got there. And it takes, I could be wrong, and this is something where people will correct me if I am, but I believe that to become part of the ABA, the birds have to be free living, have a flock, have been reproduced. And I think it's a 15 years in a row, they have to have done that before they're now considered a countable bird. For 14 years and 364 days, they are escapees. And then in that 15th year, they become a countable bird. And you have told a story about some LA parrots, which I believe the ones you talked about are green, like the ones in your movie.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
please tell the audience about that. Bring them up to date a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating story. I mean, within the last year, and I don't know if it's because of where I live now or whatnot, but I've really noticed that there are, flocks of green parrots that just fly above. I live in West Hollywood, but all over Southern California. And so I did a little bit of research on it, and they've been here for quite some time. Originally coming through via the pet trade. But what's interesting, and it's, very much like a Hollywood story, there's a lot of myths on actually where they came from originally. One of the myths was that an Anheuser Busch Gardens in Van Nuys, and as part of it, they had, a monorail that would take you on a tour of the brewery, and they'd have little boat rides, and then there was a bird show. So one of the theories is that in the 70s, when it shut down, that they just kind of said, "Hey, birds, you're free," and that's where some of these birds come from.
I
There were
went there a
stories
few
of,
times as a kid.
oh no way,
I grew up in Simi Valley, and we
okay,
used to our dad used to take us over there. I think because he enjoyed Bush beer, but nonetheless, we got to see the little kind of mini Disneyland.
yeah,
A
yeah,
couple
yeah.
couple of rides and off you go. So that's one of the theories. What else you got?
Another one was there was a fire at a Pasadena pet store and they escaped because of the fire. They escaped due to the riots that were in 92. There was a story going all the way back to, I think, to like the 50s, that they were being smuggled over in a plane, and they escaped from the plane as it was flying over Southern California. And so it was all of these funny little instances of how these birds escaped, because one thing they knew for certain was that they did not fly to Southern California. They didn't get there by flying there on their own.
They didn't cross the border and zip up through San Diego and
I guess not. No, nothing I read said that ever happened. It was all due to the pet trade.
is
But
there
what's
one
really
Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was gonna say what's really kind of great and remarkable is that all of these birds, I guess the term is, are naturalized, and
Yes.
and they're non-invasive because they're not really competing for resources with the native species, which is, great news to hear. And then I believe it is the red-crowned Amazon is endangered where it's from, originally in Mexico, but it is thriving in Southern California. So it's nice to see that, a change of location has allowed it to flourish a little bit more than it was in, back home.
Well, that's kinda cool, and I know there's pockets in the Bay Area
Mhm.
because I've seen some up there, and there's, more than one pocket in, Florida, and there are some pockets in Texas.
Yes. Yep.
And the Texas pocket makes some sense that maybe somebody came over the border, that whatnot. The story I'd heard the most often was the Pasadena pet store
Yep.
that burned, and the birds were released by a kindly employee, and at least they've given a shot at living, which if
Yeah.
that's what happened, they've done. Is there one of the theories that you think has more credibility than the others, or one that you wish was the story?
I like the Busch Gardens one. I think that one's really fun. Just hey, we're shutting our gates. What are we gonna do with all these birds? Just let them go. Like, okay,
Yeah,
like it
yeah,
seems like, a bit of Occam's razor there with being the most obvious answer.
yeah, a little bit. You give away as many as you can to the employees, and after that, what are you going to do? Where are they
Yep.
going to go? All right, so let's move out of real life, and
Sure.
you've done some research on Coyote v. Acme.
Coyote versus, yeah, as part of kind of some of the series of, I call them bird talk bulletins. I try to post them once a week, but just little stories that connect birding with the entertainment industry. And one of them that popped up was there was news out of San Diego Comic-Con that Coyote versus Acme, this film that was shelved, is actually going to be coming to theaters next year. And so I was just curious, like, hey, we all are very familiar with those Coyote versus Roadrunner cartoons. Who would actually win in real life? And so that was one of the topics that I delved into. Surprisingly enough, I think the Roadrunner would still win over the Coyote, although I don't recommend him using those Acme TNT products. Those are really the things that did him in the
You
end.
you think in real life the Roadrunner would simply be able to outrun the Coyote, or what? How do you define win? It's kind of hard to see a
Yeah,
Roadrunner.
actually, the Coyotes are faster than a Roadrunner. However, the Roadrunner can certainly fly a little bit, and then also in terms of they're just very clever birds as well, and they're vicious. I did not realize how vicious a Roadrunner is, but they will attack poisonous snakes. They will attack lizards, bang them against a rock, and they're pretty brutal for a bird. So
All right.
I give the edge to the Roadrunner still.
Well, there's your animated short coming up.
Yeah, yep.
You just I imagine the rights would be a little expensive, but you just need to get that. And I will share with the audience the book that Kean's in. I've mentioned it before, Why We Love Birds and 52 Birders on Birds. One of the guests in that book is a young woman named Danielle Bellany. And as I asked Kean and all of the guests, I asked them what their spark bird is, which is that bird that kind of motivates you to get into birding. Kean shared his 3, which is kind of cool. But Danielle was not a birder, and she doesn't have a spark bird. She has a spark nest, and the spark nest is of a Roadrunner in Texas.
Oh, awesome.
She was trying to get some extra credit, I believe, or something in a college class, and she got involved in doing some research on Roadrunners, going out and doing an egg count or whatever they were doing. And so she was being taught to look for the nests, and she found one, and she found this nest in a thorny bush, in a desert, chaparral and stuff, and fell in love with it and became a birder. She's written a couple of books. She was one of the initial people in Black Birders Week, and is a young birder. She's still in her 20s, but it's kind of cool. You tie in the Roadrunners, and again, it's not a fine line; it's a clear line, but nonetheless, between the things that we read about and see in movies and kind of absorb as children and then sometimes carry into adults, we forget that many of them are based on real life, like the Roadrunners.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
There really are Roadrunners, and they really are cool birds. And coyotes are pretty wild, a little more wily than they're given credit for in the cartoons and probably in the upcoming movie, but nonetheless, it's kind of a cool deal. Now, while we're on things that require a little willing suspension of disbelief, I understand you recently spotted a 17-foot tall pigeon.
Yes.
I've done a lot of birding in the 5 or 6 years I've been birding, and honest to goodness, nothing over about 12 or 14 inches. How'd you get a 17-footer?
Yes, if you happen to visit New York City and go to the Highline Park, you will find, I believe it's called Dinosaur, which is a 17-foot pigeon sculpture. I wish I had the name of the artist at the ready, but an artist had installed this a couple of years ago and had installed this sculpture of a giant pigeon, kind of the unofficial mascot of New York City, because they're everywhere. And since then, I think it's either in the first or second year, every year they'll do this thing called Pigeon Fest, where they just kind of have this celebration of pigeons with, people dressing up as their favorite pigeon and doing dances and improv, and it's a whole little mini event there on the Highline Park. So that was an interesting thing just to learn about, people celebrating birds in a very unique way, for sure.
Never thought about people having favorite pigeons. When I think of pigeons in New York, I think about people in the park playing chess and feeding them and doing those things, and then I think about how they're the attractant to the peregrine falcons in every major city. Peregrine falcons have discovered pigeons and think they're just a giant buffet. But I hadn't really thought about people honoring them, but that's kind of cool. And the next time I go back, I will look that up.
Yeah.
And take a look. I had not heard of that. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really cool deal. Tell me about feather fever.
This is the one about hats, women's hats.
Yes.
I think it was in the 1900s. where the bird population in, mostly in Florida, because they're the more exotic birds, was actually declining because they were being overhunted for their plumage, because women would wear bird feathers in their hats. And so through some legislation, they were able to kind of curb a lot of that. Because of the popularity of bird feathers in women's hats, there was actually a slight decline in birding populations, particularly in Florida. I know the roseate spoonbill is the one that kind of comes to mind the most,
And the
but yeah,
egrets and the herons.
egrets and the
And
herons as well.
you use the word slight, but I had heard the word dramatic, like they were almost extirpated from Florida, some of these birds. I'm not trying to counter you. That's what I can remember hearing. And I just finished a book last night by one of the other guests in the book, a gentleman named David Gessner, who wrote a book about Teddy Roosevelt, and just finished it up last night. Terrific book, by the way. If you've not read any of Gessner's stuff, you want to do that. But Teddy Roosevelt, because of what you're describing, that was one of his motivators to set up some refuges and some national wildlife stuff in Florida, was to protect these birds.
I love that.
Which is a little ironic, because Roosevelt is known for, national parks and forests and saving tens of millions of acres of land. At the same time, a prolific hunter that was quite willing to shoot just about anything that that flew or walked. So, but he did recognize the difference between occasionally shooting something and wiping them out.
Yeah.
And if I understand right, almost all of those hats were sold on the eastern seaboard.
Yep.
I think a little bit made it to San Francisco, but I believe most of them were Boston and New York at the time. And you're right, it was a huge fad, and they were going to run out of birds pretty quickly. That's kind of cool that they were able to stop that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I try to do with a lot of these stories that because I'll find these just scrolling the internet, finding interesting stories and articles, is I always try to tie it to something that's topical, that's happening in, at least in the United States. And so I think when I had posted that, it was the height of the Triple Crown, Kentucky Derby, because women are known for wearing their very extravagant hats. And it's like, hey, did you know that fake bird feather that you have in your hat actually has a pretty sinister history? And so I think, again, that storytelling, that connection to entertainment or entertaining enterprises.
And I think that's kind of cool. I think that brings a different light to birds and to birding. We get so caught up into trying to find a certain bird, keep track of the birds we've seen, and even people who don't list, you want to go out and, find your favorite bird and spend some time with it. But you realize they're a huge part of our history in a variety of ways, in commerce and in entertainment, in your case.
Yeah.
And I'm sure as you dive into this, you will just find more and more examples, which means, by the way, you'll have to come back on and share some more stories with us. And we'll look forward to that. Now, black swans, gay black swans.
Yes.
Tell me about gay black swans.
Yeah, black swans actually partner with same-sex partners, and oftentimes they will raise chicks that either their mother was lost or they're, for whatever reason, and they will raise chicks together, which I thought was
they're
just
adopting eggs or chicks.
Adopting eggs and chicks to kind of raise as their own, yeah.
Now, you used in the headline of your story, you used the word gay. Are these generally male swans?
Yes, yes. Male pair swans. Yep.
Male pair swans. Okay. And you had mentioned that they have a very high success rate.
Yeah. I think because of their ability to be a little bit more protective and things of this nature, that they have a higher success rate than a female male swan pair, because you have the two dad swans. I thought that was interesting. And again, published that during June, which is known as Pride Month. And so you find out these stories and the way they kind of permeate society in so many different ways.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. And I wonder what it is that leads them to being successful. I mean, are they better? Are they more violent, better protectors?
I think that was one of the reasons why. It was just better protectors. They're better finding food, foraging, things like that.
And of course, swans can be nasty birds anyway.
Yeah.
Swans and geese you underestimate them at your own peril. Having been attacked by both, I am well aware that they can kick your butt if they choose to.
Yep.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, did you see the one I did about Jurassic Park, connecting that to, evolution and how they've noticed with hummingbirds in California?
Bird evolution.
You are well prepared. The bird evolution of hummingbirds. They have found specimens of hummingbirds that they've had in some of the museums up along in California, and I've compared them to modern birds, and they have noticed that with the hummingbirds that their beaks have become longer and sharper to better fit into or to better access the nectar that are in hummingbird feeders. So because of something that a lot of people have in their backyard, the birds are evolving at it seems like a faster pace, because that is a source of nectar for them.
How old are the samples, the specimens in the museums?
I
mean, are we
believe it
talking?
was from, I would have to look it up again, but it was a significant, I mean, a decent amount of time.
Okay. But I mean, we're talking 100, 200 years?
I think about 100 years.
And there's an actual change that has
Yeah.
occurred inside of 100 years.
A noticeable change with the beaks of certain hummingbird species. Yeah.
Wow, that seems like a remarkably short time. I mean, we've always been taught that evolution takes so long.
Yeah.
You've got to select the better traits and whatnot. On the other hand, hummingbirds, have a shorter life expectancy than an elephant. So maybe they can figure things out a little quicker.
Yeah.
And hummingbirds are just so cool.
Oh, yeah.
Just so cool. I mean, for those who might not know, a hummingbird weighs less than a AAA battery. It weighs roughly the equivalent of 12 paper clips, and yet they still migrate. They can fly 600 plus miles over the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America or whatever it is today.
Right.
But they can fly over that open ocean. But it's such a narrow band of for success that they have, that if they get blown off course by as much as 50 miles, they generally don't have enough energy to make it, and they will starve to death just adding 50 miles to their trip. So they're just and of course they might be the most aggressive of all the birds. They're just nasty birds in defending their territories. I sit out on my front porch and I can watch them for hours. They defend. And you'll see a male hummingbird. We'll have 4 or 5 feeders going at one time, and he'll defend all of them. It's like, come on, man, there's 3 gallons of sugar water out there. You couldn't drink it in 5 years, but nope, they are battling constantly. So they are badass birds. Now, tell me about Murder of Crows.
This is a good one. So I'm sure everyone was familiar with the song Murder on the Dance Floor, which is the Sophie Ellis Bextor song. And so I just kind of got to thinking, you've always heard of a flock of seagulls. You've always heard of a gaggle of geese. Murder of Crows is one of the ones I think is somewhat known, maybe not as known, but these are all, what you call groupings of different types of birds. And so I said, I wonder if there's more than that, or what are some of the more unique ones? And so I learned that a group of parrots is a pandemonium, a group of flamingos is a flamboyance, a group of owls is a parliament, and a group of eagles is a convocation. So, take that, Game of Thrones, with some of these names. But yeah, I thought that was just so interesting.
Well, and extend that out. I should have been better prepared, but I wasn't. There's an author, Steve Burrows, and he writes about a British detective, and he's a birder in real life and in the books. The detective is, and the author is a birder in real life. And all of his books are named after things. One of them is A Murder of Crows. One of them is called, I believe, A Siege of Bitterns.
Oh,
but
that's great.
He does that. Each one of the books is exactly what you're saying. It's a play on the correct flocking name of a group of those birds. And in some way, those birds play a role in the murder. And if I can just pitch Burroughs as an author, they are, for birders especially, they are fun books to read. If you haven't read them, grab them. But there's 8 of them, and I just gave them away a couple of weeks ago. I cleared out the bookshelf because I realized I wasn't going to read them again. But it's a neat series, and it's kind of a fun thing to do. So this is your time, Kean. Tell us where people can find you and listen to you, because anyone who stayed this long, who's watched for 45 minutes, has got to be fascinated by your stories, and they're going to want to find out what new ones you're going to come up with. So tell us where we can find them.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram and on TikTok at Hey Kean, or it's Hey_Kean. So HEY_KEAN. And yeah, I try to post one a week. There's tons of stories, that I just have either flagged or ones that I think that are particularly interesting. I just got back from Disney's Private Island or Lookout Key at Lighthouse Point. So there's a couple of stories in the works for that one. And then one of the ones that I'll probably have to
Tease us on that a little bit. Tell us just a little bit.
Yeah, actually, Disney surprisingly has really, really extensive conservation efforts, particularly at the newest island destination, look at Kean Lighthouse Point. So much so that then when they were building this new destination, they took bird conservancy into account. So they would build away from certain flyways or areas where there's a particular birds. There is a cuckoo that lives, and another topic was that there is a cuckoo that lives on this particular island, and they are using it, and it's pretty elusive, and they've used a 3D printed version of this cuckoo to place it in certain spots to kind of draw out the real one so they can better observe it. So there's a couple of topics based on that island destination.
Okay, tell us again where we can find you.
Yep, it's at HEY_KEAN, Hey Kean, and that's on Instagram as well as TikTok.
That's very cool. Look, if you, Kean, is there anything else you want to share with us? Anything else that you want people to hear about today?
One last thing, and it's if you love these kind of stories and really want a deep dive, it's not a podcast that I did, but it's one that I listened to a while back ago, and it's called "The Wrongest Bird in Movie History." It was by Dakota Ring, and it talks about 2000 Charlie's Angels film where there's a scene that involves a bird that's supposed to determine where this guy's being held captive, but the bird that they use in the film is not the same species that they reference, and it's this whole thing. And there's just been articles within the birding community about how incredibly wrong this the bird that they use in this. So that was it was the Dakota Ring podcast, Wrongest Bird in Movie History. It was posted in October 24 of 2024. So that's a really, really deep dive, great story. I'll probably do an abridged version on my own TikTok, but it's one of my favorite stories and one that people ask about often.
So you have to be thinking about doing a book on this. You ready to announce it today, or
I've never thought about that. That's a great idea.
Because it would be, I mean, come on. First of all, the title is The Entertainment Birder, and you've got all these magical stories, and you're going to be hearing more. I mean, as you get known as this guy, people are going to start to send you different stories about different birds, right? And
I would love that. Yeah.
So, and they could leave you a message on Instagram or on
totally,
TikTok, right? So
yeah.
If any of you have a story that you think you want Kean to dig into and share with the rest of us, man, share it with him, and we will have you back as a guest with your next rack of stories, because they're fascinating and they're fun and they're different than almost all birding stories. A lot of birding stories revolve around, I spent 3 days hiking through the mountains looking for a gyr falcon, and I finally saw it a quarter of a mile off for 1/8 of a second, and it was a highlight of my life. And by the way, that's me. But, that being said, it's a little easier, I think, to find a 17-foot pigeon in New York City.
Yeah, of course.
So we're there. Hey, if you've enjoyed this, man, share it with somebody. If you've got friends that are Disney fans, let them know that this is out here, because it is my experience, having grown up in Southern California, the Disney fans are different than regular people, and they get into this stuff. And so learning about grotesque sculptures and northern gannets and things, they will find that fantastic. And we're going to wrap this up, but stay tuned. I'm going to do field notes, which is the segment I wrap up each episode with, where I pick something in nature and discuss it for 5 or 6 minutes. I pick real things, but it's similar to what Kean does. It's just real animals and real birds, so we can do this. In the meantime, Kean, man, thank you so much for your time today. And for all of you listening and watching, stay curious and have fun.
Thanks, Scott. This is so fun.
Thank you. It was a blast for me. Hello, and welcome to today's edition of Field Notes. Field Notes is a little thing we put at the very end of each of our podcasts. Focus on one issue: a bird, a mammal, a park, an environmental issue, whatever it is it might be that's frankly of interest. And I get to put together a couple of facts and talk about it. Today we're going to talk about pelagic birding trip, which I went on yesterday. Pelagic comes from the Greek word pelagos. I believe I'm pronouncing that right, which means open sea for us with regards to biology and birding. It refers to animals that live in the open sea, or in this case, above the open sea, and are not coastal or terrestrial. So those are the birds that spend almost their entire life out in the open sea. They come into to some obscure places to nest, but other than that, they are open ocean birds, and that's where you go to look for them. So that is when birders say, hey, I'm going on a pelagic, that generally means that they're taking a boat, They're going fairly far offshore, and they're going to look for birds that they cannot see from the coastline or from the beach, even with a good scope. So that is a fun thing to do. So there were 21 of us that went out yesterday. We went on a boat called the Teaser, which is owned by Coastal Scuba. It's a fairly new boat to them. It's not a new boat, it needs a lot of work, but I'm sure they'll get that done. It's part of their Little River fleet. The captain was a young man, and I do mean young, by the way, under 30. His name was Lee. Great guy, good captain, good listener. It was his first birding trip, first time he'd taken out birders. He's always done fishing. He was a deckhand for 5 years and then 4 years now as a captain. And Austin was the deckhand yesterday, also his first birding trip. And they were really cool about it. And they took direction well and listened to the leaders of the trip. I wasn't one of those leaders, but I was up on the bridge all day, so I got to hear them and watch the interaction. The boat they weren't 100% certain, but looked like it was about 47 feet. There were 21 of us that went, and 3 of those were women. We started off in North Myrtle Beach. We were in North Carolina, I believe, when we left on the Calabash River. We weren't in North Carolina for very long. We went over into South Carolina, and that was by design. There really aren't any pelagic trips anymore going out of South Carolina. There used to be some going out of Charleston, but some of the birders decided that we'd try to put this together as a bit of a test, if you will. So I was honored to be invited and be a part of that. It was pretty cool. So we met on Saturday morning. We met pre-dawn. We saw a few birds while we were hanging around waiting to board, highlighted for me by a Cooper's hawk. And then we saw 5 river otters walking along the dock. So that was kind of cool to see. And then we boarded the boat, and I was up on the bridge with a couple of the leaders and the captain. And I innocently asked about marine mammals. And as the captain was explaining, he was certain we were going to see dolphins, and there was a possibility of seeing some whales. The leader of the trip very clearly, very kindly, but very clearly directed him to not stop for marine mammals and certainly don't chase them, that the focus of this trip was on pelagic birds, and that was by design. So fair enough. I'm more of a wildlife guy, but man, I was an invited guest. I'm just happy to be out there. We had an 11-hour day that we spent out there. The birders that were with us were all enthusiastic listers, and this was an opportunity for people that keep county lists and keep state lists, and of course life lists, to see some things they might not have otherwise seen. And it's hard to find those. So it was a pretty exciting thing, and it was fun to watch the birders as they went through that. I enjoyed watching the birders almost as much as I enjoyed watching the birds. It was kind of cool. The captain and a couple of the leaders tried to explain the concept, if you're familiar with it, when you're on a boat and you're trying to let somebody know, especially the captain, but let everybody know where the birds are that you might have seen. 12 o'clock is straight off the bow, and then to the right is 3. Dead back on the stern is 6, and then to the left or port is 9 o'clock. But people get excited, especially if they haven't been on pelagics a lot. So you'll hear people yelling bird, but with no identification as to where it was, or left or right or over there. None of those things are helpful except to alert the boat that there is a bird been seen. And boy, if you want to see electricity jolt through some people, especially midway and a little more than midway through the day. It was hot out there. It was over 80 degrees, fairly still. We had a little bit of a breeze. And of course, people get a little bit tired, and that early couple hours of enthusiasm starts to fade just a little bit for most of the birders. But as soon as somebody spots a bird, man, it is a jolt of electricity through the boat. So that was pretty exciting. Most of the birds that we saw, we didn't see a tremendous amount of birds, which is probably why there aren't a lot of pelagic trips in South Carolina. But with most of the birds that we saw, they were far off. And so we were relying quite a bit on the people that had cameras and were getting photographs. So when we'd spot a bird, people would try to get those photographs, and they'd have binoculars on them. And then when the bird took off and flew out of sight, you'd see 2 or 3 people huddled around each of the photographers as they tried to figure out what bird we had just seen. And you would hear a lot of discussion about how much white do you see? Is there white around the eye? Is there white on the underwings? Black versus gray was a big topic of conversation, because that's a differentiator. That's a field mark for some of these birds. And you're mostly dealing with black, white, and gray. Those are the 3 colors that you're primarily dealing with. There are some that have colored beaks, but in general, the birds themselves, black, gray, and white. So a lot of discussion about, was it black or was it gray? And it's hard to tell. I mean, you're looking into the sun, things are silhouetted, they're far off. You're looking at a camera. It's pretty wild, and it's fun to watch and fun to try to figure out what the bird is. We wound up going 42 nautical miles offshore, so we were out there pretty far, and we did see some bottlenose dolphin and maybe some spinner dolphins, not sure. I didn't get a great look at them. Not as many as I had hoped we would see. We didn't stop for them, so no problem there. But we did get to see them, and they did run with the boat a little bit. You know how they'll go out in front of the bow or hang out back in the wake. And so we got to see a little bit of that. Once we got away from the typical shorebirds, of which we saw all the common egrets and herons and whatnot, we did see some non-pelagics pretty far out. Once we got out past the gulls, then anything you saw, you were really interested in. So when the laughing gulls decided they'd gone far enough, you're out there looking. We saw a number of barn swallows over the course of the day. We saw one brown-headed cowbird that didn't look great. Not really sure. We saw that at about the 12-mile mark, and nobody seemed terribly optimistic it was going to make it back to shore. We were hoping it might land on the boat. And somebody brought up that they've been out on pelagic boats before where captains will put a couple of potted plants on the boat, and that then when you run into some of these birds that might be a little disoriented or struggling, they're attracted to that and land, and maybe they're given a chance of living. So something they talked about maybe doing in the future. But we also saw a sparrow. No one was 100% certain what kind of sparrow it was, but we did see a sparrow out there, and so that was kind of cool. So the barn swallows, the brown-headed cowbird, female, and then some type of sparrow. On the pelagics, we were hoping to see 5. I mean, obviously, people were hoping to see more than that, and there was talk of maybe a tropic bird or a frigate bird or a booby. We didn't get any of those, but among the more standard pelagics that you might expect to see out there. We have some people that were really well experienced pelagic birders. They were hoping that we would see 5. Oddly enough, we didn't see what somebody said was the most common bird in the world, the Wilson storm petrel. Don't know if that's true or not, but that was one of the things. We did not see one yesterday, which was kind of a given. We were fully expecting to see that. But we did see 2 types of terns, a sooty tern and a bridal tern. The bridal tern for me was a life bird, so I was thrilled. I don't really worry much about county and state birds, so that wasn't a big deal. Getting to see a new life bird, that was cool. And 3 different shearwaters, a Sargasso shearwater, Scapoli shearwater, and Cory shearwater. We saw a number of Cory shearwater, which was also a lifer for me. I thought I'd picked that up a couple of years ago on a different pelagic trip, but I didn't. So in looking at this trip, I've been lucky enough myself to have done a handful of pelagics in Northern California, Southern California, Alaska, North Carolina on the Outer Banks. And all of those, I saw a larger number of birds. And here there just aren't a tremendous amount of them, which I think is probably why we're not doing these trips very often. But still, it was kind of fun to go out and do it. And I think everybody had a great time. And I think most of the people that were there would do it again if it was offered. One of the leaders said they had a list of about 20 additional people that were hoping to go, but for whatever reason, conflicts and stuff couldn't go on this particular trip. And then there was some pretty serious talk about doing a winter trip, and you get a whole different turnover of birds when you do a winter trip. And so I'll tell you what, if they do a winter trip and I'm honored enough to be invited, I am there. I am on my way to do that. So if you get a chance to do a pelagic trip, wherever you are in the world or wherever you're visiting, it's just a fantastic thing to do. And I hope you see a ton of birds. I hope you see some new ones. I hope you see some different kinds of birds. And I hope you're safe and make it back to shore and consider it a highlight day. Take care, be safe, and as always, stay curious.